The household had found itself in an era of pleasant stability. With most of the elder siblings married off, the grand estate hummed with a quieter sense of satisfaction, a far cry from the flurry of courtships and scandals that had once occupied its halls. Anthony, once the most reluctant romantic of them all, had settled into a life of devoted companionship with Catherine. Their marriage was one of passion, duty, and an unshakable partnership, their love flourishing amidst their responsibilities. Benedict, the artist of the family, had found himself in a marriage that nurtured both his creative spirit and his heart, his days filled with both laughter and inspiration. Colin, ever the adventurer, had married Penelope, whose wit and intelligence had long been underestimated by the town, and together they carved out a life richer than Colin had ever envisioned. Daphne, the Duchess, continued to thrive with her husband Simon, raising their children with the same grace and strength that had once captivated the entire social season. Even Francesca, once the most elusive of them all, had found her soulmate, and now lived a quiet yet fulfilling life with her husband, far from the pressures of society's watchful eye. Yet, for all the contentment that filled house, there remained one sibling whose heart and mind had yet to be claimed, Eloise. Marriage had never been at the forefront of Eloise's concerns. Unlike her sisters, who had gracefully stepped into their roles as wives and mothers, she found herself more intrigued by the ideas within books than the notion of finding a suitor. In truth, she was far too consumed by her own curiosities to even entertain the idea of love. Her standards, some might say, were simply ahead of their time. A man who shared her beliefs, who debated with her rather than dictated, who would not demand she sacrifice her independence for the sake of wifely duty. Such a man, in her mind, did not exist. After all, what grand future could she hope for in the hands of a society that wished to reduce her to the role of a housekeeper and breeder? She could hardly bear the thought of tending to a garden, managing a household, and bearing child after child as was expected of her. The grand gestures of aristocracy, marrying a duke, securing a wealthy match, ensuring her family's legacy, meant nothing to her. Eloise dreamed instead of deep conversations, of exchanging letters filled with wit and intellect, of finding companionship in shared beliefs rather than mere convenience. The very thought of strolling endlessly in a manicured garden, simply waiting for life to happen, was enough to make her scoff. But unbeknownst to Eloise, her path was about to cross with someone who had lived an entirely different life, someone whose ambitions had been shaped not by privilege, but by necessity. Across the city, in the less fashionable part of London, a young man named Theo was passing his days in the dimly lit printing shop where he worked. His hands, roughened by labor, were ink-stained and calloused, but there was a quiet pride in his work. Though he lacked a title or fortune, he had something far more precious, his mind. Theo had been raised with the understanding that his fate was already decided. Find a decent woman of his class, marry, have children, and die having spent his life setting type and pressing ink into paper. Yet, unlike many of his peers, he refused to resign himself entirely to such a fate. He had found joy in literature, in the written word's ability to challenge and provoke. Books had taught him that the world could be changed, that ideas could inspire movements, and so Theo spent his nights aiding in something more than mere printing. He became a quiet force behind the very posters that caused whispers and scandal among the upper class. On this particular evening, as the lamps flickered against the cobbled streets, Theo had just finished helping print a set of posters demanding equality for women's rights, one of which included a poem he himself had written, a call to arms for those who sought change. He knew well the risks involved, knew that the wealthy who ruled London would see his work as dangerous. But he also knew this. Words had power. and it was this belief that would one day lead him straight into the path of Eloise. For now, however, Eloise remained unaware of the existence of this ink-stained revolutionary, just as Theo had yet to cross paths with the sharp-tongued debutante whose ideas could match his own. But fate, as it often does, was already at work.